Hello and welcome to the Rise Up with Orion podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today to a topic that I'm sure many of us are being bombarded in all the media, whether it be magazines, I hear it on the radio, podcasts like this. It is a topic that is on the front of many people's minds. So let me introduce you to our GLP-1 expert. This is Rachel. I work with Rachel here at Orion on many different aspects. But Rachel is a board certified health and wellness coach with a huge passion and respect for how our body works together as a whole. For the first few years of her career, she worked strictly with clients prescribed GLP-1 medications before they hit heavy popularity in the US, learning very early the ins and outs of how the body's experience on these peptides and how to successfully use them. She holds closely the importance of empowering individuals to step into the control they have of their body and how it wants to heal itself if we can give it the environment to do so. Rachel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yes,
Uh,
I am very excited to be here.
yes, like I said, this is a topic, the GLP-1 medications, things like Wegovy, Ozempic, they are all over the place. So tell us how this has happened. Obviously, you were in the early stages of it, and now I feel like any which way we turn, people are talking about it and people are using them. So tell us what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give a little bit more context right into my background and kind of how I came to be around these peptides. So starting my career, like stated earlier, I was a health coach in a program that was strictly created to leverage these medications. Actually, I remember when I got the gig and I was not only educating people on this new job that I got, but what GLP medications were because the people in America, right, we didn't know what they were at that point in time. It was early 2021. Still very much just the Hollywood, right, maybe knew about
Yeah.
it and, just different demographics, right, not necessarily super popular. So that was really the first year and a half of my career, not only, diving into being a health coach, but also learning about these medications on the front fields and experiencing along with my members what are the side effects you're having? What are the experiences you're having? Seeing that number on the scale, right?
Hmm.
Go down at, the rate that it does. So, it is kind of funny to reflect and see the history of pharmaceuticals in our country a little bit because many that we have were originally intended for something else. And then
Hmm.
we realized, oh, it actually also really works for this, right?
Hmm.
GLPs have actually been around for decades, right? For a really, really long time, specifically for diabetics. And so now they have been leveraged, obviously, as we know, for weight loss. And so it's just been a slow journey, right, over time. I think, through, again, pharmaceutical leverage, healthcare industry, right, really realizing, oh, we can leverage this for the obesity epidemic, right, that we're in.
Hmm. Well, and I think as well as you were really seeing it, when it was really early, and now, tell me if I'm wrong, many people can get their hands on it. It's not something that is like this hush 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 secret. They're marketing it where it isn't as difficult to get as maybe it used to be.
Yes, absolutely. I can't tell you how many, even just on YouTube, right? I get ads for various companies that are prescribing it in the pill form now, right? It is a
Hmm.
lot more common when they first came out a few years ago as well. So yes, they are very accessible. Obviously, financial restraints and, different, healthcare programs that you're in, right, may have a different lens that you experience, but
Hmm.
yes, very, very common.
Yeah, so I think, as we kind of dive in a little bit to it, obviously the benefits are, you know, shouted from the rooftops, if you will. So again, I would love for you to dive into the benefits, but also the risks, like who shouldn't take them? Should we all get off this podcast and go find them? What are we looking at from the benefits and the risks with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And to even, take a step back before even diving into the nitty-gritty of that, because this really does play into the benefits of ri and risks, is just kind of taking a step back and really realizing what this has done to our healthcare system and our
Absolutely.
our way that we view health, right? There isn't another non-surgical product that even comes close to that, right? 10 to
Hmm.
15% body weight loss that people are seeing on these peptides. And it would actually be more akin and appropriate maybe to compare it to something like birth control, right? Or antibiotics, right? And how
Yeah.
much those things really change the landscape of our health moving forward. So just to kind of give a little bit of reverence almost for this is a really big new thing and we're using it in a new way. And so we don't actually know what it
Yeah,
like
exactly. That was what I wanted you to say.
50 years down the line, right? Exactly. It is, again, we've had it for diabetics, but it's being used in a really different way. So, yes, obviously, like I said, so that, benefit of 10 to 15% weight loss, right, is kind of the trending mark that is hit. And in my past experience, that was how the program was sold, right? That we're going to get you to that minimum of 10%. And then obviously person dependent, maybe it's more, maybe it's less.
Hmm.
But it actually is a naturally occurring hormone, right? It is a naturally occurring hormone that is a part of our digestive process that helps with the insulin sensitivity, helps with the digestion. All of the organs that are involved with digestion, such as the liver and the intestines and the stomach, right, esophagus, all the things, all of these organs are affected by this peptide. And so, yes, on the surface, it is inhibiting that hunger, right? That
Hmm.
hunger cue is obviously the really biggest draw towards the medication and how it impacts us. So this is going to be obviously affecting our blood sugar level.
Hmm.
The original
Thus the
diabetic.
diabetic part. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Cravings are diminished. Appetite is also diminished. And that can be a little bit of a slippery slope, right? When
Hmm.
appetite does get diminished. And I have worked with members and have seen the appetite severely diminished, right? And so then we're getting into that. Um, are we going from 2 to 3,000 calories a day, right? Wherever that
Hmm.
person may have been down to like 1,200 or 1,000 or right. And
Yeah.
we've got a severe drop off in that. So there's just a lot of layers and nuances, right, that go into that extreme decrease, right, of energy intake.
Yeah, and Rachel, the weight loss is happening pretty quickly from what I can tell and what I've read, and even people that I know personally that have taken it. The weight loss is pretty quick too. I mean, we're not looking at years, it's seems faster than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I was just looking up at a new statistic of this that about 70% of people who do get on a GLP-1 within 2 years actually opt to get off of it
Oh,
um,
wow.
because
Wow.
they
Yeah.
are by their own volition, right,
Hmm.
ready to be done. And when,
Yeah.
they've hit whatever mark or threshold that is, right, that they were seeking.
Yeah. So what are some of the risks in taking this, if people are thinking about it or maybe even those that have been on it?
Yes, yeah. So definitely, as we stated, right, talking about just that severe lack of appetite and craving, which can be a very empowering, great thing, right? And, certainly don't want to only paint it in a bad light. The food noise is real, right? The
Hmm.
addiction to the sugar, to the processed foods, right? It's a real struggle. And can be such a burden, right, on so many people. So, it absolutely can be a great thing. But then as you continue going down that road, right, there is a likelihood to be undernourished, right? If you are, again, severely dropping your energy intake, your calorie, I'm going
Hmm.
to interchangeably use energy and calories, right? Because I think we sometimes get a negative notion with calories and trying to keep it low. But it's energy, right? It's just a way to measure energy that our bodies need to survive. So being undernourished, also just recognizing, like we said, it's new for not only the people who are taking it, right, the patients, but also the providers, right?
Hmm.
Not every single provider has been prescribing a diabetic this medication for decades and decades, right? So that, there is a piece of there's just a nuance that we, I think, as people who would possibly be taking these medications, need to understand that as well, is that you're walking a new journey, but so is your provider right along with you, and they're learning as well. Um,
Hmm.
and then, any negative impacts on mental health, right? And
Yep.
specifically with people who have a history of mental health, any sort of issue, right? Depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, anything in that realm. I actually just had a conversation with someone who didn't really know that their Mounjaro medication could cause any sort of flare up, and he has a history of that. And
Mm.
so that was something that we had to talk through. And he's been on it for over a year and didn't even realize that something he was experiencing could be drawn to that.
Yeah, when I think it's really important too, what you're saying, it's not a set it and forget it. So it's not a take the medication and just live. I mean, there's so much more to it, which is why we're having this conversation. There's so much more to this journey of these medications than just putting them into our body. It goes beyond that, which I definitely want to talk about because there are some serious chronic issues that happen with them. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one of the big things, right, thinking about that immense cut in the energy that you're
Mhm.
taking, right, kind of leads into, yes, you're losing weight, but you're also going to be losing muscle, right? Unless you are very, very intentionally preventing that, right, through
Mhm.
nutrition, through exercise. So, which is hard to do without having a very decreased appetite for food, right,
Yeah.
in general.
Mhm.
And then we're layering on top of, your ability to eat a certain amount of food, that volume has decreased, right? And so we're not maybe able to get the amount of protein that we need in a day, et cetera. So, being under muscled is definitely a really big overshadowed, right, chronic health issue. And to be very clear, right, GLPs don't cause muscle loss, right,
Mhm.
directly, but being undernourished, right, and not eating enough food that your body needs and is burning every day can, right?
Right.
So, thinking about just the body's ability to adapt, right? You take someone that's eating 2,500 calories a day, again, that gets cut down to say 1,200. That's an extremely big deficit. And our bodies are smart, right? They were designed to be able to adapt to that. And so it's actually going to begin offloading weight. And part of that weight is going to be the muscle because muscle is actually really metabolically expensive,
Mhm.
which is a fancy way of saying our muscles burn a lot of calories, right?
Yep.
And so when we have decreased the amount of calories that we're intaking, our bodies say, whoa, hey, I can't preserve all this muscle
Yeah.
anymore because my muscle needs more energy than I'm getting. So I'm going to offload and get rid of some of this muscle so that I can now survive at this new calorie
Mhm.
intake, right? This new energy intake.
Mhm.
So that's a worry, right? That's something we don't want. Why does that matter? Yes, there's the aesthetic piece. There's, how strong you feel, right? How easily can you lift those groceries or the grandkid, right? All of these things get affected. But even more so than that is that muscle is also directly affecting all of the other chronic health issues that we have in our country, right?
Mhm.
Like heart disease, as most of us know, is probably most of us the biggest right, killer in our country, the number one. And actually, 20% of the people who die from heart disease are under muscled. Okay, so
Mm.
most of them are obese. Yes, most of them are under muscled and obese, but that remaining 20% actually isn't obese, but they are still under muscled.
Mhm.
So why do I bring that up, right? Is that both the camps are experiencing that under
Yeah.
muscle, right? Whether
Yeah.
you're obese or not. We tend to really focus on the obesity, the heart disease, right? But at the core of it, it is that metabolism impact with the muscle.
Well, and I think about as well, many of us have skipped meals in our life or forgot to eat or we're on the road, things happen. And again, I even think about just myself when I skip a meal or I don't eat enough, the way that I feel is very, very evident. So again, to think that now I'm in a deficit and now you want me to go and exercise? Absolutely not. I mean, there's nothing left in the tank to be able to do that. So again, I even think about that just from when you're talking energy literally the amount of energy that you have to give um, to keep those muscles strong is
Yes.
hard.
Yes, it is. It is. And that's a very common place that people can get right on these medications is exactly that. Am I going to choose to help and do the chores around the house or go do a 30-minute, strength training workout, I don't have
Yeah.
capacity for both, right? And so then
Hmm.
that does get into what is your quality of life, right? What is that long-term trajectory you want? And getting into a little bit more of a, deep look, right, at that long term.
Exactly. Well, and just being really intuitive. Like I said, it circles back to what you said a little while ago, is this is a journey. It's not a set and forget it. There, you do need to focus on getting the calories in your mouth and making sure you're working the muscles. And we'll talk more about that. But again, it's work,
Yes.
believe it or not, it's not a quick fix because there is work that needs to happen on the back end.
Yes, yes. And that is actually really kind of, in my risk category where just kind of the ability to apathetic, right, to the work you have to put in. And again, going back to, okay, X event happened at work, it super stressed me out and it made me want to pull for the donuts, right? Just kind of use a very blunt
Sure.
example. I now don't have, right, that trigger in my mind and my hormones, right, telling me go for the sugar, grab the sugar, you're stressed out in this moment. So now instead of saying, okay, I'm gonna just keep going on my day and, keep losing weight and I, had a stressful scenario, but I don't feel like don't need the ice cream or the donuts.
Hmm.
No, that's when we need to do the work, right? And to really retrain our brain because those stressful events aren't going to go away once we get off the medication. And
Yep.
it's such a great tool, right? And can really be a cheat code in a way to be able to do the journaling, right? To work through what is that thing
Hmm.
that stressed me out? How can I respond to this? What is maybe a more fruitful way that will serve me in the long run, right, to manage that stress. So
Hmm.
if and when, right, I do get off that medication, I have those tools built and I've rewired those neural pathways to not expect and want the ice cream, but to then, work through whatever process you've developed.
Absolutely. And I do want to dig in more to that as well as your strategies on how to
Yeah.
make this a lasting change. But I also want to talk a little bit about the timeline on how that happens with, individuals who are seeking this option. Kind of what the GLP experience looks like. From what you've seen, what's typical from the dosing, those types of things. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, yes. So, what is typical and maybe what is the most optimal way to leverage this tool, right, are two different scenarios. And so we can dive into
Yes. And
um,
safe.
yes, exactly. Long-term safe, again, that long-term, longevity, right? So typical maybe somewhere into the medium high range, right, of numerical dose that you get from your provider. Again, it goes back to the beginning, what we talked about. This is also new for providers, right? And so it is on them of what research are they doing? What resources are pouring into them to
Hmm.
educate them, right? And just kind of understanding all the nuances of that. So you're going to get prescribed on some sort of dose. I always really try to encourage patients who are wanting to go into this route, and I'm able to have that conversation prior to the prescription happening is to really advocate and talk to their physician through. I don't want to experience the complete cut of appetite, right? I want to slowly wane into this. Can we start a little bit smaller? Now, I don't think most providers are going to put you on like the top of the top, right off the bat. But again, as individual. So really being able to work with your physician one-on-one and slowly wean into that to not decrease necessarily your appetite, but those cravings, right? And
Hmm.
finding that fine line because there is a difference, right? We still want you to have not only an appetite for food and to fuel your body, but for life, right? And
Yes.
able to do the chores and the workout, right? And
Hmm.
all the other things. So that is really the biggest thing though, is typically it's going to be a decrease in appetite and cravings. The severity of that is just dependent on where the individual is starting, both, weight wise and also, prescription amount wise, right? And dosage wise. And so that's kind of the first phase, right? You're just adjusting. A lot of people experience nausea. So a lot of people will experience digestive issues and disruption. Some people don't experience anything and they just
Mhm.
have lack of cravings and they're good to go, right? It, just really is individual. But really that first kind of phase is what I call it, can last like 2 weeks where your appetite is really diminished to like 6 to 8, right? It is unfortunately a pretty wide range, but
Mhm.
very individual.
Yeah. And I think the side effects are very important as well. I mean, there's no question if you're having side effects, they would show up
Yeah.
because this is such a drastic change, to people's overall lifestyle. So
Right.
um, I think again, it goes back to being intuitive and really listening to things that are happening because everyone's journey is going to be different.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And just again, really always making sure that you are keeping your physician on the same page of you of it's okay to bug them. It's okay to
Yeah.
send messages,
Yep.
right? Make sure that they know the side effects that you're experiencing, whether good or bad, right? And any maybe different way you reacted to a stressful event that caused
Hmm.
maybe a more depressive or anxiety episode than you would have in the past, right? Or vice
Hmm.
versa. Again, it just really is very individual.
Well, and to all of our listeners, you'll see that Rachel is talking a lot about the relationship with the physician and the communication with the physician as well. And again, the media is saying that anyone can get these medications, but it is so, so, so important to have a physician, a medical professional that is, watching and looking and listening as well.
Yeah.
So just wanted to reiterate that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So, Rachel, you talked a little bit about kind of some of the strategies,
Mhm.
to be intuitive and to maybe reduce some of these chronic problems that are happening. Dive in a little bit more to your suggestions, really putting that health coach hat on when you have the physician and the patient involved. Those strategies to mitigate, some of these chronic conditions, under muscling, if you will,
Yeah.
from occurring.
Absolutely. So yes, definitely trying to prevent the least amount of muscle that your body is going to lose as possible, right? Is the biggest, if like there's one thing I really, really would encourage one to take from this time together is that we need to prevent that muscle loss as much as possible.
Hmm.
Muscle, right, is anti-cancer. It does help with blood pressure. Right, there's just so many great things. Just wanting to be able to see someone's expected life, right, their life
Hmm.
expectancy
Hmm.
is going to be correlated to their strength. So really keeping that muscle on. How do we do that though, when your appetite is super diminished and the thought of eating 4 ounces of chicken or beef or whatever it may be, fish at every meal? Is way too much, right? On
Hmm.
top of produce or, whatever it may be along with it, right? I completely understand that. So, making sure you're prioritizing protein at your meals as much as possible, right? And just
Hmm.
recognizing and giving yourself the grace that you're not gonna be able to eat as much, and that is okay.
Right.
Right? Then
Yes, but keep eating.
that is the goal, yes, but to
Yes.
keep eating, keep nourishing that body. So really prioritizing the protein, and with that, right, having that again, extreme diminished hunger, really leveraging supplements is actually going to be a really key important thing. Why is that? Because you've not only super decreased the amount of energy that you're giving your body every day, i.e., you're also decreasing the amount of macronutrients, the amount of micronutrients, right? Vitamins, minerals, carbs, fats, proteins, right? That your body is able to use and absorb. And so, in the vein, right, of trying to keep that muscle on as much as possible, we may need to be leveraging protein shakes a little bit more. And when I go into that, right, that's a whole other
Hmm.
thing of finding a clean brand, right? Finding a brand that doesn't have a million ingredients in it, really doing your due diligence on finding, clean ingredient options in that. They aren't as satiety filling, right? They're not going to keep you
Hmm.
as full as if you had 5 ounces of chicken with broccoli and sweet potato and whatever, right?
Hmm.
So being able to utilize that and also understanding that because you are probably eating less whatever protein sources you're used to having prior to being on the GLP, that you actually are also going to need to focus on supplements that might not have been important otherwise.
Mm.
So, meaning BCAAs, right? Going into the branched chain amino acids, because you aren't getting that through the food, right? The whole food, because you're just not eating as much as you maybe once were or should be.
Hmm.
That now becomes something that we need to think about, right? To preserve, again, that muscle on our body and to keep it from falling off. Our bodies, our muscles need those branched chain amino acids.
Hmm.
And then other supplements, right, can be like creatine and collagen, right? Getting that hydration into the muscle, being able to nourish that muscle and make sure it's well fed so that it's not wanting to come off. These are all just other signals that we can give our body that says, hey, I know you want to lose fat, right? I know I've decreased my energy. We want to, offload to be able to course correct, but we want to keep this muscle, right? So if
Yep.
we intentionally nourish that muscle, that is what is going to be signaling our body, let's not get rid of this.
Yep, we want to nourish it, but dive into how we need to use it.
Exactly. Yes. So that is then the other piece, right? Is, we got to be able to exercise in some capacity. And so then this goes back into what I was mentioning about kind of phase one, right? Of when you're really adjusting to that most likely intense decrease of calories each day
Hmm.
to phase two of where your body levels out. You get a little bit more familiar, right? And you're not experiencing maybe the negative side effects that you once were at the beginning, right? As
Hmm.
well as maybe you are able to sneak in a little bit more food, right? Because your body does adjust to that new caloric intake. So being able to challenge yourself in that way. So training wise, you shouldn't be doing overtraining, right? Especially in that first phase. So,
Hmm.
for example, if you are someone who wasn't strength training at all, let's say, prior to being on a GLP, hitting the gym 4 days a week for an hour is not what is in store for you, right? That is
Hmm.
that is going to lead to overtraining, which will actually lead to increased muscle loss because we are just banging and banging and banging on those muscles, right, and breaking
Hmm.
them down, and you're not giving them the energy to and rest, right, to be able to store them back up. So it might be again very individual, which is where a health coach comes in, right, where a personal trainer would come in um, and be able to help you craft. Maybe it is just 2 days a week for 30 minutes, right? And super stripped back. So it's dependent on where you were at going into the medication, but it's going to be very stripped back at that first initial phase when your energy is low, your appetite is low, as well as then looking at that second phase, we might be able to amp it up a little bit more. Right, but it's that balance of not overtraining. And when you are not sleeping well, when you are super crabby all the time, when you
Hmm.
are, right, maybe feeling that hunger increase too much, right? And, you went from a comfortable place to like, I can't satisfy my hunger, right? That would
Hmm.
also be a sign of overtraining. So it's finding that medium ground, and there really, unfortunately, isn't like a one size fits all of this is what you do and then this is what you do because it is so personal. But I think we all know, again, getting back into that awareness of how our bodies are feeling and doing, do you
Hmm.
have an appetite to work out, right? That is going
Yep.
to be a really big indicator.
Yeah. And Rachel, one of our listeners popped in and said that they're, taking a GLP-1, and on the day that they have their injection, they feel really shaky, and how that can be avoided. First thing that came to my mind with that is, maybe, maybe more calories. Again, I even just think about normal. If I'm not eating, I'm often very shaky. So tell me your side of that on, how that maybe can be avoided if that's one of the side effects that's popping up.
Yes, yes. Injection day is a thing to develop.
Mm.
So yes, everyone has very, very different effects on injection day. So shakiness, can be a cause of many different things, right? And I would be
Hmm.
curious to know if it's like full body shakes or if it lasts all day, and
Hmm.
if it's specifically confined to a certain area of your body. But it really is again with it being so individual.
Yep.
go back to your provider, make sure you're
Hmm.
keeping your provider in the loop so that they can help if at all possible. But then
Hmm.
I would say yes, experimenting around with, are you drinking enough water? Are you eating enough food, right? Are you making sure that your blood sugar is stable and not
Yeah.
completely dropped low? Because my initial thought too is, maybe the blood sugar is getting too low. And then that injection day, right, that's going to lower the blood sugar
Yeah.
even more. So
Hmm.
maybe it's even eating a little bit more prior
Hmm.
to injection day, right? And really trying to push the calories maybe a little bit the day before. So it's all about that timing, I know, and I know it's kind of a mucky answer, but it
Hmm.
really is going to be playing around with maybe the bookends of injection day, how much you're
Yep.
eating, and
Hmm.
also really making sure that you're hydrating, especially since we're eating less, we're actually hydrating less as a default of that as well, because 20% of our hydration actually comes from our food.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you mentioned it as well. We haven't dug too much into it, but again, the water consumption I think is huge. Again, so many of us, use water as kind of a tool to satiate or a tool to stay hydrated or a tool to deal with the hot weather. I mean, it's one of those, but again, water intake is so important, with these medications as well. Again, maybe not coming to mind as one of the first things.
Absolutely. And again, talking about muscle retention, you got to hydrate. So lots of
Exactly.
reasons, right, why that
Yes.
is super important.
Yes, exactly. So, Rachel, we're kind of, wrapping up I'm going to say episode one of GLPs because I know that the next conversation that's going to happen is, so I've been on it, and now what?
Mm,
There's,
yeah.
as you said, the phase two, three, four, five, six. So again, more to come on that. But again, I would love for you to kind of reiterate some of the top points. I'll throw in mine to start is, that relationship and communication with a physician being so number one.
Mhm.
Many of us can go on the internet and find what it is that we want and make an order and we don't have that oversight. So that's my number one tip that I want all of our listeners to really know and scribble down is to have that relationship with a doctor and keep that communication line open
Mhm.
because of the individual journey. So that's mine. I'll turn it over to you for your kind of closing tips, thoughts. Maybe
Yeah.
they're not tricks at this point, but
Absolutely. Yes. And yeah, and to just swiftly, kind of tailcoat off of that, again, going back to the beginning of just having a little bit of reverence for the fact that these are new, right? And,
Mhm,
and these are new
mhm,
for everybody involved. And so, knowing too, of reiterating, you are the expert on you, right? You know your symptoms best, you know how your body feels best, right? Oftentimes, when we go into this, I'm just going to do what I'm told. And I know these
mhm,
medications are going to be the holy grail that will finally break through, right? And maybe you've been told do all the work for you, right? Or really get you to that point. And so encouraging with you do know yourself best and are the expert on you. And also let's dig into what maybe additional support you need
yeah,
to be able to do that work, right? That is needed with those behavior modifications to think about that long term, hopefully coming off the medication someday, right? And that is a whole other conversation that, is to be had and with yourself, with loved ones, right? People you trust, your physician,
yeah.
whomever it may be, but do you want to be on that medication forever, right? How do you
Hmm.
feel about that, and the nuances of what that is? So, thinking about that and really equipping yourself to be able to put into the work and rewire those behaviors, right? And taking the time to reflect and think about how did I get to the point that I got to, right? That I
Hmm.
really wanted to change and use this
Hmm.
medication to leverage. And then, what is the path forward, right? We don't
Yeah,
want to just let the medication be the thing that it is for 2 years or however many long it is. And then you just kind of let life happen afterwards, right?
yeah.
And as we know, many people are gaining fat back and not muscle back, right? After
Hmm.
they come off these medications. Again, that's dependent on lifestyle, right? So maybe, working with a personal trainer, maybe working with a health coach, right? Whatever it may be, but just taking time to really think for yourself, I've got this medication, I've got this tool, you've experienced the good effects that it brings.
Hmm.
What's that long game, right? What do I
Yep.
want myself to experience 2 years from now, 5 years from now, etc.
Exactly. Yep. Creating the habits to move forward and not, just reverting back to where we were. I think that, you know, we see it a lot, but again, that's what we want to prevent. And that's why we're having a podcast like this to educate about it. So,
Exactly.
like I said, we're just touching the surface, listeners, on this topic. Like I said, there's so much out there, and please don't Dr. Google all of it. We're going to try to bring it to you, but also, talking to your health coach, talking to, Rachel works with Orion full time. And talk if you want a health coach, talking to your health coach, we can help you bridge this gap between the scary medication and bringing your physician and creating those habits. So, Rachel, thank you, GLP-1 expert. So excited to have you here. And like I said, just touch the surface and hopefully we can continue the conversation moving forward. But I appreciate you joining our podcast.
Yes, you are so welcome. Thank you for having me today.
Yes, thank you, listeners. And we will be back next month. We're actually going to be diving into a little bit of a different topic on how to stay fit after 50. So I know I'm getting no younger, neither are you. So join us next month. We'll be talking about, unfortunately, the aging and how we can stay fit after 50. So thanks so much for joining us. And Rachel, thanks for bringing your knowledge to the podcast.